Okay. All right. So welcome to the chat. And today we have Bobby Soper from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, right?
Yeah, technically Sunrise, but the outskirts of Fort Lauderdale.
Fort Lauderdale. And you're doing okay with your staying in place? And
Yeah, there could be worse places to be. So we have a beautiful environment here. A little bit of cabin fever, but I'm not going to complain. Everybody's healthy
well,
at home.
don't you get out and go for a walk?
Yeah, well, I do. I do from time to time, but I'm ready to get on a plane and travel a little bit.
You might have to wait a while for that.
It does appear to be the case.
All right.
Hopefully
So
not so long.
yeah. So why don't you start telling us a little bit about yourself, Bobby, and your background, and we'll start from there.
Sure. I'm founder, CEO of Sun Gaming Hospitality, involved with both as an investor, participant, and advisor in some cases of various both gaming and non-gaming type projects. On the non-gaming side, renewable energy, some in global agriculture, basically projects that are innovative or have high exponential growth. Obviously, gaming is my background, so I'm involved quite a bit, both on the land-based side and the online lottery, sports wagering, and online gaming, as well as integrated resort development, land-based. My background is in the land-based world, primarily with Mohegan Sun, which I spent 20 years in various capacities. I was CEO of a couple of the properties, both in Pennsylvania and at the flagship in Connecticut, and finished my tenure there as CEO of the Mohegan Tribal Gaming Authority, which is the corporate entity of Mohegan.
So we're basically recording this interview because you're going to be one of the speakers at the Casino Esport Conference, which is scheduled for September 8th through 10th at the Luxor in Las Vegas. But we all know right now we're going through this horrible pandemic, and I wanted to ask you, how has the pandemic impacted your industry or the casino industry as a whole? Maybe give us some insight.
Sure. I mean, I think like many industries that have come to a complete halt, it's pretty dramatic. Something that none of us has ever seen. Never would have thought we would have seen mass closure of casino properties. We've always joked about it, what it would take to actually close down this industry. And now we're finding out, it's very unfortunate. And in this case, we've all lived through a number of downturns. I know personally in 2001 and then of course 2008, which was even more severe. This one is unique in the sense that, not only do we have direct economic impact, from a decline in the economy, unemployment, all those other traditional economic metrics, but in this case, the closure has created, exacerbated circumstances, essentially, cash bleed. So every day there's a ton of expenses, and those not in the industry may not appreciate, of actually keeping, essential employees, on staff, the operation, or at least the property, even though empty, sustainable. There's just a lot of other expenses that others don't know. I mean, depending on the size of the property, a daily cash bleed could be in the 7 digits. So it's not only the opportunity cost of lost cash flows, but now you also have this expense that is not offset by any revenues coming in.
I mean, in a lot of ways, I could see it. It's like, I never believe that gambling's ever going to go away. It's just part of our culture. It's part of the culture worldwide. But I mean, in many ways, you can say that after this pandemic is over, it's almost like we're starting from scratch. I mean, it seems like that, we're going to have to get people back into the casino, and it's got to be done more marketing. I mean, how does a casino go, or where do they go from there? Is there a plan, or are they creating any plans like that, or are they just dealing with the current bleeding of money?
Yeah, I mean, look, every operator is different. I think the more strategic operators are obviously planning as much as they can. It is a fluid situation. Again, this is the first time it's happened. There's a lot of unknown variables that are not within the control of any operator. What government's going to do, what lenders are going to do. Gaming has historically been a very resilient industry, but not only have we not dealt with something like this, but we're also at a time where the industry is far more mature, far more competitive than it was in the past. In the past, perhaps some of these issues could be faded by the fact that in many markets, you had an undersupply relative to demand. But today, you have a very competitive market, and it's going to be more challenging to bounce back, right? And you're going to need help, from your lenders, and you're going to need, obviously, to execute well, on the rebound. But it's challenging because we don't know how, what's going to happen, right? What types of policies are going to have to be implemented. There's a lot of planning going on now related to social distancing and crowd control and all those things, that you hear about. But until we understand the context of what it's like actually when it's time to reopen, it remains to be seen.
Well, I mean, I've listened to sometimes I listen to Governor Cuomo about their stepping in, from the government point, they're stepping into he calls it the reopening phase. So they've gotten to that plateau where they flattened the curve, and now they're going into that reopening stage. So it's got to be, as you said, is something that's in the thought processes of these casinos. But even beyond that, I mean, I see things like the El Dorado Caesars deal went through even in this pandemic, but that was a deal that's been worked on over a long period of time. And, I don't, is El Dorado getting a raw deal? Because at this point, when Caesars has to open back up, is it going to be worth the amount that they're paying for it?
Yeah. Well, look, I'm not dare going to assess whether or not El Dorado is getting a fair valuation today. I will say this: clearly, I think, based on what's happened, like we've seen in the past, I think there's going to be some value opportunities for those companies that have stronger balance sheets that are able to acquire. I think you'll see valuations decline, and the severity of the situation may dictate, how far of a decline those valuations actually occur. But I think for larger transactions like that one, and I think for larger companies and major investors and even lenders today, that own assets or invested in assets, understand the long-term implications here. We're all in the same boat. They understand, and this is just not industry specific. So I think that as it relates to any major transaction like that, there's obviously an opportunity for many to pull out or reset, what the valuation is. But also, I think when you look at something so big, it really is a long-term play, right? And it's not what it's going to look like in 3 months or 6 months, but what is it going to look like in a year, 5 years, 10 years, and every transaction is different. But I do believe, there are going to be a lot of opportunities for those that are in a stronger position to acquire, and acquire at a value after this all settles.
Yeah, I know, because now with the pandemic, everybody's home. So the positive notes are that the iGaming industry has exploded, and even online poker's coming back. And then there's the whole, quandary of esports and video gaming, and how does the casino step into that? Because we know that's been blowing up as well without the betting on sports or conventional sports. I mean, you turn on the TV on a weekend, you're going to watch a League of Legends tournament on ESPN. Where does the casino gambling market shift from the brick and mortar business as it is and has been to now something more of what we're seeing as more of an online entertainment? And how do we pull the two together for the future after the pandemic's over?
Yeah, look, I'd say generally speaking, and those of us in the gaming industry, have known this now for a little while. I mean, there has been a shift from gaming to non-gaming, and that's a behavioral shift. That's simply generational, right? We've seen it in other industries. Retail is probably the most conspicuous example.
Yeah.
When you talk about the retail apocalypse, right? Gaming is certainly not even close to that, at least not now. But I think that fundamental shift driven by behavior, taste, preferences of a new generation, a new demographic, will continue, right? I think what's happened here, by the actual closure and the greater exposure, in some markets at least, to online opportunities, perhaps will accelerate that shift where it makes sense. The United States, we don't see, there's not many jurisdictions with online casinos.
New
So
Jersey being one of them, but
New
yeah.
Jersey being one, Pennsylvania, and there's some others. So great opportunity, and while I don't think there's many public numbers yet at this point of how online gaming, and I'm excluding online sports wagering, which obviously has been impacted since there's no sports playing, but on online gaming generally, the anecdotal evidence is there's been a profound increase of demand and volume naturally. In those markets where they're legal, and I think it's an illustration of where we will be in the future, and it's an opportunity. I think there's an opportunity here for land-based operators. I know there's some that don't necessarily would agree with this, but it is an opportunity to illustrate, I think, to the decision makers, whether they're legislators or the decision makers in any specific jurisdiction, that this is going to be the future at some point, and we need to understand that. This is an opportunity to take this. I like to say, create lemonade out of lemons, and maybe make some movement, make some progress on changing laws that allow remote gaming, right? Especially if that remote gaming is tied to the land-based facility, so we can preserve these jobs in the future. Esports is a great example that you brought up. I mean, I think the virtual NASCAR event, which was televised, I believe, on Fox National, had 1.3 million viewers. I mean,
Yeah.
that's phenomenal for a virtual race.
Yeah.
People are looking for something, right?
Looking for something, and it was well adopted. You had the NBA 2K tournament. I don't think it was necessarily executed well.
Right.
You had a number of NBA players playing, probably not the biggest headlines. Perhaps the programming could have been a little better, but look, it was still prime. ESPN network, other NBA.
Formula One also did Formula One also had an esports racing tournament as well.
Formula One. So I do think, look, there was more exposure, for esports. It was another opportunity. And I think what it does is it helps to accelerate adoption, of that product, especially in demographics perhaps that weren't as exposed or followers of that product.
Now, the thing is, like areas of New Jersey, Pennsylvania, they have iGaming, online gaming. Do you think that they're at an advantage because people are still exposed to their label or to their product online? Do you think they have an advantage of getting people back in the brick and mortar when everything goes back to normal, more so than a Vegas casino?
Well, look, I think the answer is they should, because now they have constant engagement. Presumably, they're making a little revenue in the meantime, but more importantly, they have that engagement to at least some of their customers. And I know there's some debate, and I generally understand and would agree. I was CEO at Mohegan when we launched. We were one of the first companies to launch real pay-for-play online gaming in Atlantic City. We had a skin at resorts. So I understand a little bit that it's not a strong overlap between the land-based consumer and the online consumer. But there is one overlap, right? And two, I think perhaps more importantly, again, is it was an opportunity to expose this product to the land-based consumer who may have otherwise not tried it, right?
Yeah.
And so again, there's not going to be a perfect acquisition capability, because there are some differences, and it's not an identical overlap, but it clearly is an opportunity, both from an acquisition standpoint and a consistent or a constant engagement of the customer perspective, while at the same time making some revenue. So there's a clear advantage for those that had online gaming operations.
We found that we talked about engaging in a different demographic, or that esports is now sort of gotten this limelight because there's nothing else to bet on. But I mean, getting back to when we do get back to normal, how can you see the brick and mortar casinos themselves integrating video gaming and esports as an amusement side, as a way to connect with the younger audiences when they're in the brick and mortar?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, look, I think one, going back to the earlier point, this was an opportunity to expose other demographics to what esports is all about, right? I mean, you had some sporting events that were virtual, on national programming, including some sports wagering. I mean, sports wagering on NASCAR, which was well received, right? So you had some of that. That's number one. But I think number two is this. Fundamentally, we're ultimately seeing a shift in the consumer in a casino. We all know that. We've talked about it. Slot manufacturers are trying to adapt, find products that are more accommodating to the millennial, and the subsequent generations, right? And it's challenging, right? It's everything is done by this guy right here, right? And we've seen that in all the other industries, and gaming is going to be no exception. And the question becomes, how do we connect and how do we leverage this versus fighting this, right? And, you're not going to substitute, the gaming floor and the revenues and the volumes and the significant, generation of cash flows from the gaming floor. On a per square foot basis, there's nothing like it. Perhaps maybe retail in an airport. That's about the only thing that comes close to generating the revenue per square foot on a gaming floor relative to any other type of real estate. So you're not going to turn your gaming floor into an esports arena and make up your revenues. But what you do is you can help, mitigate some of the lost revenue on the land-based gaming side with online gaming. And then you can, create experiences in the gaming space, or in the integrated resort that you have today, by repurposing that space to create experiences that the new generation will like. So I think it's a combination of recapturing some of that revenue online, whether it's gaming, specifically gaming, most importantly gaming, sports wagering, all those other things, and then driving those gamers, as well as your traditional gamers that will typically come to the property, through a evolving and over time repurposed integrated resort facility.
Well, I mean, a lot of people mention and talk about how esports will be bigger than conventional sports wagering, because it's got, there's multiple amounts of events going on 24/7, 365 days of the year, where in conventional sports, there's just seasonal times, and the games are at certain times of the day, etc. So in that respect, for the wagering side, I mean, do you see that esports will grow bigger in the betting industry, in the wagering industry, than regular conventional sports wagering?
I'd like to add is that I like to add that as a two-part thing, okay? Prior to the pandemic and now post-pandemic, because remember, we were having these conversations prior to the pandemic. The difference is that now we've actually seen this stuff in action, whereas the video game companies have exploded with a lot more revenue. And in addition to that, the iGaming, of course, is doing quite well, and anything else that happens to be online, obviously. So does this, what happened, the catalyst, does it create that shift? And how long before, people just are right now in safety mode, do they move to this other mode, which is, we got to do something?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, legitimate questions. I mean, I think first, generally speaking, esports is still a very young industry, especially as it relates to sports wagering on esports, right? We are at the very early stages, which means, by the way, that you're going to have exponential growth. And we're already seeing that. I mean, we went from I think 2 years ago, 3 billion or a little over 3 billion in wagers on esports to what is predicted to be in 2020, depending on who you ask, anywhere from 8 billion wagered to 13 billion wagered, right? And if it's 8 billion wagered, it's going to be over a half million yeah, in revenue. I mean, over 500 million in revenue, excuse me. So I think which is relatively small compared to the sports wagering industry as it exists today, but it shows you that it's in now the beginning stages of exponential growth. Once again, I think, this event helps to accelerate that. And anytime you accelerate any type of industry or any type of sector within an industry in its early stages, it just makes that growth factor multiply much quicker. And I think you will see that here. I do think, to the point that the nature of esports, right? The fact that it's year round, it's very flexible, it's very accommodating, allows it to grow fast. I think that's number one. And number two, of course, and probably more importantly, is that the younger demographic, as they get older, will help contribute, and the newer demographic coming up will help contribute to that growth. Do I think next year we're going to see esports wagering get anywhere near what traditional sports wagering is? Of course not, right? But I do believe this is a tremendous opportunity, and if you're an operator, whether it's on sports wagering, whether it's online, or whether it's land-based, clearly that should be part of your planning process. That should be in your strategic plan. Even if it's not your 12-month, it should definitely be in your strategic plan. It's inevitable. It's a question of how long and when we'll see sort of the critical mass. And look, I think even Nevada just a week ago or several days ago, authorizing sports wagering for ESL Go, especially Counter-Strike, right? That's just another example, right? I think that was catalyzed in large part by what's happened over the last several weeks.
Yeah.
Those are the types of things that I think we're going to see more and more.
There's also, I mean, that was just something that was in the news, but I mean, as far as attracting that next demographic of younger people, I think they're coming into a world where we have to really create something very different from them. And UNLV has been working on, the Blackfire Institute, which is developing not just the esports side of it, but also peripherals around the hospitality end of it, changing, interiors of the rooms to have, sort of like Alexas or something inside those rooms that can help, with making plans for dinner plans and other things like that are going to be much more tech connected. Do you see that as also part of the reinvention of the resort and the brick and mortar?
Yeah, look, I think it goes back to tying it all together, right? I think in the case of UNLV creating, I think, a very insightful, progressive incubator, right? We'll call it technology, gaming, and hospitality incubator is a very smart thing to do. I mean, it is, I think, going to help contribute to the future, right? It'll I think it's an illustration of where we're going and where we're heading. And those that can figure out how to connect the dots to take the current model, the traditional gaming model of the traditional integrated resort, and transitioning, in an effective way to what will be the future model, even if it is a little bit down the road. Those are the ones that are going to succeed, and that requires planning. And anytime you have any organization, but certainly in this case, UNLV, adopting a tool in a place where you can host and generate and create an environment for the exchange of ideas, training, experimentation. I think is a positive for the industry.
And here's my last question. I know I'm going to finish with this, but if everything was if they had foresight, we didn't pre-pandemic. But I mean, if the casinos themselves, I mean, asking this question is, if the casinos, and we know that they will, create this online experience with this tech hospitality experience inside the brick and mortar, having that online experience, let's say they had it today and they had created it 3 years ago, do you think it's going to help build more audience, build more connection to the brick and mortar, and as an overall gaming experience? It's obviously, I mean, the answer is probably yes, that it's going to develop much more of a robust ecosystem for the gambling industry.
I think the answer is, frankly, the casino industry really doesn't have a choice. If you want to survive, you have to do that, right? Unless you're a denier and believe that gaming is different than any other industry, and that there's not going to be a shift, at least from a large group of your database of your group of your customers onto online, right? Mm-hmm. Then I think you're going to be left in the dust. And so you have to find a way to do that, right? And these bricks and mortar facilities are large. They're saddled with a lot of debt, so they have to recapture a lot of that revenue that they're going to lose, and they're likely, in large part, going to recapture it, by providing products and services to what the new generation of customer wants. Yeah. It's kind of that simple. It's not simple to execute, and it's certainly not simple to plan for, and no one knows exactly the timing, but that's how it's ultimately going to be played out. It's adapt or die. Yep. Correct. Well, Bobby, I wanted to thank you very much for coming on to the CEC marketing show, and we'll hope to see you in September. Cross fingers. Let's hope that this pandemic is over by then, or at least it's been dealt with in some way that we can. That's the thing. We don't know day to day what the hell. In the same room together. Yeah. Hopefully. So, but anyway, good seeing you. Enjoy. Go for a walk. Stay safe. Wear your mask. Maybe we'll all be wearing masks or hazmat suits at that point. Who knows? Well, we'll see. It was my pleasure, and I'm looking forward to getting on an airplane again, and especially being in Las Vegas. Well, if you're going to go on an airplane, you probably will have to wear a hazmat suit.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Have a good night. Thank you. All right, thanks. Appreciate it. Yep. Bye-bye.